This is a very important resolution because it affects every single one of us Americans. We here in government do hereby believe that the exchange of a little personal privacy for counterterrorism monitoring is not only acceptable, but good. Let me state that again. The exchange of personal privacy for counterterrorism monitoring is not just good, but we will show you today that it's necessary and it has saved lives and will continue to save lives. So today we're going to talk about this House as the federal government. We can talk about privacy. It's the right to self-govern, to exercise our practical reason without undue influence. I'm going to do a little introduction and I'm going to get into my main points about how this status quo, where we are as a nation since 2001, is not only good, but it's saved lives. I'm going to talk also about government's responsibility to protect our lives. My partner's going to talk a little bit more about how it saved lives of our citizens. First, what is the status quo? What is the situation that we are here in today? Well, in 2001, on September 11th, we were attacked viciously by a foreign group of terrorists. Since then, our government has put in mechanisms in place to protect our citizens. There have been Patriot Act. There has been monitoring of electronic surveillance. The Patriot Act makes it easier for FBI and CIA agents who have suspected terrorists to be able to get warrants to find out what they are doing in the United States. We believe that privacy can be traded for counterterrorism because it will save lives. That's a question, though.
Don't you believe that, or don't you think that if you give the government too much power, that they will abuse it? Absolutely
too much, but there are checks and balances. And with the Patriot Act, it is just a little extension. Currently, if you're a law enforcement officer, you have to go to a judge, and you have to say, "Sir, I believe this person is selling marijuana. I need a warrant. Here's the probable cause." It means more likely than not, I'm using my law enforcement materials, my knowledge, my background, my experience to assess that probably this person is selling drugs. Now, when it comes to the government, with the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and they suspect somebody's planning a terrorist attack, it makes it a little bit easier. It makes it quicker. And they have more materials and more opportunity to be able to investigate possible terrorist attacks. Now, we believe that's okay because there are still checks and balances. So great question, but there are checks and balances. So we're supporting the status quo since the 9/11, the Patriot Act that our Congress passed. We're supporting the CIA and what they're doing with counterterrorism. Now, let's talk about privacy, what privacy we've exchanged. Do you think that the FAA should be able to know who owns planes? Well, that's an invasion of your privacy because that's something that only you should know, right? No, that is an invasion of your privacy, and we're saying that's okay. Do you think that if you're crossing into this country, that a law enforcement officer should be able to check who's in your car and make sure there are no illegal aliens? No, we think that's okay, acceptable. That's not a violation of your privacy. That's not government, taking over everything and running our lives. No, let's look at everything. The Coast Guard, Customs, the TSA, like I mentioned, the checking of electronic surveillance, the CIA, the FBI. How about port security? We check everything that comes into this country in boxes, right, to make sure that there's no bombs coming in. What about all of these things? So my first big point is government responsibility. It is the government's responsibility to protect and defend the United States citizens from terrorists, from anyone that would hurt you, foreign and domestic. That is the basic foundation of our Constitution. That it's the government's job to protect you. Okay? Now, was privacy guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution? Does anyone know this? Because it was not. So sure, it's a good feeling that the government should be invading your privacy. It's not nice to have anyone over your back. We're not talking about Big Brother. We're talking about reasonable things to help save our lives, to helping our counterterrorist surveillance team, the FBI and CIA, to have somewhat a little bit of opportunity to help find out terrorists and bust them, like we have had. My partner's talking about how it's actually saved people's lives, literally. We can talk about that, and I'm going to talk about my second point, but I'll take questions first.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the philosophy. Can I actually talk about the pragmatics of how you're actually going to change the status quo that's currently in place now, and the actual plan of what you're going to enforce?
The motion states that we will exchange personal privacy for counterterrorism monitoring. So we have exchanged our assumption in society that somehow the government should never interfere in our lives. We've done that with the Patriot Act. We are supporting the Patriot Act, and we're supporting what the CIA and NSA, the TSA has done. And we stand in affirmation of those great policies, of the Patriot Act, of electronic surveillance. So, a part of the government responsibility is questioning what do you think is privacy? What do you think is your assumption of privacy? And sometimes it's skewed. Anything that you volunteer, any call that you make, any email you put out, anytime you go out in public, all of that's voluntarily. So the government has this opportunity, and I say a right and a responsibility, to make sure that if you call a terrorist overseas, you email a terrorist overseas, if you exchange with a drug dealer or a gang lord, that the government has that opportunity because you volunteered that information. And that goes back to government responsibility, because the first definition of our government's responsibility is to protect and defend you from harm, from terrorism. So it's a reasonable thing to believe that personal privacy can be exchanged for terrorism monitoring. We've showed you some policies. The Patriot Act, also what the NSA has done with electronic monitoring, which is obviously, as we've stated, reviewing your emails that are suspected to be connected with terrorists. With the Patriot Act, we've talked about being able to get easier warrants, but still prove to the judge. So we put forward and supported these policies, which some over here believe are too extreme, but they're necessary in this day and age. Post 9/11 world, this is the world that's living in pre 9/11 world, and we have terrorists that are trying to hurt us and kill us here today. So we are supporting not just the status quo, but the continuation of good policies, including the Patriot Act, including the government having the necessary resources to stop another 9/11. And if we don't continue with these policies and allow the government to have these resources, then that might happen again. We do not want that. So the judge is going to vote with us today, because he who saves more lives in the United States will win this argument. We'll save more lives.